Hello and welcome. This is the video lecture for the second week of the module HPSC0153, Science Communication in a Global Perspective. And in this video, I want to talk about a question, which is, what is science communication? So last week, you should have had a lecture and a discussion about the different narratives which exist in society about science. And this week, we are delving into the topic, asking ourselves, what is science communication? How does it relate to science, the production of knowledge? How does it exist in society? What is its role in society? So what is science communication? So there are two main views or ways of answering this question. The first one is illustrated here in a cartoon which comes from the website phdcomics.com, and basically it illustrates how science circulates in society from the lab or the place of production, which is here, through to the press office at the university, which produces a press release, which is then picked up by a news organization, which diffuses the news through different channels, including the internet. And then it's again picked up by different media, from the internet to cable news, and then it goes down to local news organizations, and then it reaches somebody who is supposedly ignorant and doesn't really understand what's going on, which is your grandma. And as the piece of science information, science news circulates, according to this model, it is simplified and increasingly transformed. So the view which sees science communication in that way holds that science communication is something which happens in one direction. It's a one-way process. As I said, as scientific knowledge, the bit of scientific information circulates, it is simplified. Simplification means that accuracy is diminished because there are details which are removed, caveats, etc. And more generally, science communication in this view is something which is done to science and something not good. So there are implications to this model, to this received view of science communication. One is that, which underpins the received view, is that science and society are separated. They exist in two different realms, if you want, or cultural spaces. And knowledge basically is produced in the lab, so that's the first step. And once it has been developed in the lab, it is diffused outside the cultural space of science to the public. And it's important to really understand that this received view sees science as developing aside from the public, from society. So one can ask, what is the finality of science communication according to this view? So the first one is really to educate people. So it really sees science communication as science education, and to educate people whoever they are and wherever they find themselves. So it's a kind of one size fits all. By the end of the process of science communication, if it has been done appropriately, people should know more about science. They should be more educated, and science literacy, if you want, will have increased. The second objective of that of science communication, according to this view, is to foster an appreciation for science in the public. So it's the idea that the more people will know about science, the more they are likely to love science and to have positive views about the work of scientists. And the third function or finality of science communication, according to this view, is really to enforce the idea that science is the gold standard from an epistemic perspective. So it's the best and most trusted way of producing knowledge. And basically, no other ways of producing knowledge, no other ways of knowing is worth considering as valuable and desirable in a properly educated and enlightened society. So that's the received view of science communication. There is, as you may imagine, an STS view of science communication, which is best summarized, I think, by this model, which we owe to science communication scholar Bruce Levenstein, and which was published in 1995 in a paper about the cold fusion story, which happened in 1989. And basically what Levenstein was interested in was to understand the role communication played in the production of a piece of knowledge, which was the claim that cold fusion could be achieved at, or atomic nuclear fusion could be achieved at room temperature, hence the phrase cold fusion. And what is interesting, I think, in this model is that it conceptualizes and represents science communication as a multiplicity of instances of communication through different media, between different groups, in different contexts, and all of these instances of communication constitute science communication. So in the STS view, science communication is multidirectional. It doesn't go one way. It goes in a multitude of directions between scientists and journalists, between journalists and scientists, between scientists themselves, between journalists and politicians, between scientists and politicians, between politicians and journalists. And the key idea, I think, from the STS view, which is something we'll come back to at the end of the lecture, is that scientific knowledge is made along the way. So it's different from the received view, where scientific knowledge was first developed and then communicated. Here, scientific knowledge is made as it is communicated. And replacing communication at the heart of knowledge making leads to saying that the accuracy of knowledge increases as communication occurs. So that's also something we'll come back to at the end of the lecture. And overall, it's to say that science communication is intrinsic to science, as communication is intrinsic to science. So it's not something which is separated or happens alongside science making, but it is part and parcel of science making. So as you can see, it is a multi-step model, but not a linear one. It is all happening at the same time. And science communication, as seen from an STS perspective, postulates an imbrication of science in society. And science communication is what enables this imbrication of science in society. So according to this view, the finality of science communication is to produce knowledge, which is socially robust, which can exist solidly in society. It is not only to foster public understanding of science, but to foster mutual understanding between scientists and non-scientists. So non-scientists can understand what scientists do and how they think and what they are looking for, but scientists also can understand what people in society of which they are part, want, and how they relate to science and what science means to them, etc. So it's really about creating a dialogue between science and other ways of knowing, because that's what is happening in society amongst people who are not necessarily scientists. Everybody has different ways of knowing. But, and that's an important caveat, the STS view of science communication recognizes and is alert to the idea that science communication, although it's a multidirectional, inclusive way of producing science, is a way of asserting, or can be a way of asserting, the cultural boundaries of science and the social order that goes with it. And this is also something I want to discuss further down this lecture. So the received view on the one hand, the STS view on the other. So you see it's very different ways of approaching that phenomenon of science communication. So at this stage, to end this introduction, we can ask the questions: what is science communication? And for the purpose of this of this lecture, let's start with a very basic definition, a working definition, to say that science communication is all the exchanges, it's the set of exchanges which take place in a society about science. So this definition, which is very broad, has two consequences. One, it brings to the fore the idea that science communication does not occur in a vacuum. It is something which is situated in a time and a place, and therefore it is contingent. The way science is communicated varies from one period to another, from one place to another, and the way science is received through communication also varies depending on time and places. The other consequence is that the cultural contents about science, which are produced for the purpose of communicating science, have to compete with the other cultural contents which exist in society, which can be seen in that instance as what some scholars have called a communication landscape. So contents about science interact with other contents which are also communicated in society. So we've got a working definition of what is science communication, and now we will try to unpack this notion and look at what happens, what have people found who study science communication, what have they found when they've looked at what happens when science circulates in society.